I stood by the service entrance of the manicured lawn, smoothing the wrinkles of a dress I had purchased 3 years ago from a consignment shop in New Haven. The fabric was a sensible navy blend, breathable enough for the stifling Connecticut humidity, but it looked hopelessly dull against the sea of pastel silk and linen drifting around the garden. This was my sister Sylvia's day. Or rather, it was the day my parents Harrison and Bernice had been curating for 22 years. The Vandergraft estate in Greenwich was in full bloom, a testament to old money maintenance. Hydrangeas the size of basketballs lined the stone pathways, and a 12-piece jazz band played softly beneath a white marquee tent that likely cost more than my entire sophomore year tuition. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated with trays of champagne and escargot, weaving through a crowd of 300 guests, senators, board members, and the social elite of the eastern seaboard. My sister Sylvia stood at the center of it all. She looked undeniably stunning in a vintage white Chanel suit, her blonde hair swept up in a chignon that screamed executive potential. She held a flute of Dom Perignon, laughing lightly at a joke made by a man I recognized as the chairman of the Commerce Bank. "Loretta, for heaven's sake, don't just stand there like a statue," a sharp voice hissed near my ear. I turned to see my mother Bernice. She was wearing a periwinkle gown that matched her eyes that were currently narrowed in disapproval. She scanned me from head to toe, her lip curling slightly at my scuffed heels. "I was just waiting for a gap in the crowd to find my seat, Mother," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, try to be inconspicuous," she snapped, adjusting her diamond brooch. "Table 19 is near the back by the caterers. And please, if anyone asks, you're working on a personal project. Don't bore them with the details of that state school you attended. Today is about excellence. It's about the Vandergraft legacy. We don't need any reminders of mediocrity." She turned on her heel and glided back toward the VIP section, her smile reattaching itself instantly as she greeted a judge from the appellate court. I wasn't offended. I had lost the capacity to be offended by Bernice Vandergraft about a decade ago. I was the eldest daughter, the first draft, the practice run that didn't quite meet the specifications. I was 30 years old today. I had graduated 6 years ago quietly with zero fanfare, and I had spent every day since working 2 jobs to pay off the student loans my parents refused to cover. Sylvia, on the other hand, had just graduated from Yale with a degree in art history. A degree that had cost our family trust fund a small fortune, topped off with a graduation gift of a fully paid-for loft in Tribeca and a promise of an executive position at Vandergraft Holdings. I found table 19. It was indeed next to the catering tent, where the smell of roasted lamb was overwhelmed by the exhaust of the portable generators. I sat down, checking my phone. I had a shift at the bookstore tomorrow at 8 a.m., and I needed to calculate if I could afford the train ticket back to the city, or if I'd have to take the bus. "Champagne, miss?" a waiter asked, pausing at my table. He looked exhausted. "Just water, please," I said, "and keep it coming." From my vantage point, I watched my father Harrison tap a spoon against his glass on the main stage. The crowd hushed. He looked every inch the titan of industry, silver hair, bespoke suit, the kind of jawline that suggested he had never heard the word no. "Ladies and gentlemen, sir." His voice boomed, amplified across the lawn. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate not just a graduation, but a coronation. My daughter Sylvia represents the future of this family. She represents the return on an investment we made with love and foresight." I took a sip of lukewarm water. Investment. That was the word they always used. They invested in Sylvia, they divested from me. But as I watched my sister beam under the spotlight, I felt a strange weight in my handbag. A heavy cream-colored envelope that a courier had handed to me just before I entered the gates. I hadn't opened it yet, but I had a feeling the investment strategy was about to change. To understand the scene on the lawn, you have to understand the dinner table of my childhood. The Vandergraft dining room was not a place for nourishment. It was a boardroom for minors. My father Harrison did not believe in unconditional love. He believed in meritocracy, or at least his warped version of it. I remember the night everything changed. I was 18, sitting across from my parents, clutching an acceptance letter from NYU. It was a good school. I had worked hard to get in. I had placed the letter on the mahogany table, waiting for the praise that other children received. Harrison had put on his reading glasses, scanned the tuition costs, and then looked at my high school transcript. It was solid, mostly A's, and a few B's, but it wasn't spectacular. I wasn't captain of the debate team. I wasn't a violin prodigy. I was just Loretta. Diligent, quiet, observant Loretta. "It's a poor value proposition," Harrison had said, tossing the letter back to me. "Excuse me," I stammered. "The tuition is exorbitant," Bernice chimed in, cutting her steak with precise surgical movements. "And for what, a degree in English literature, Loretta darling, we have to look at the ROI, return on investment. You simply don't have this aggressive spark required to make that money back." "But you're paying for Sylvia's prep school," I argued. "That costs more than my college tuition." "Sylvia is different," Harrison said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Sylvia has executive presence. She charms. She commands a room. She is a blue-chip stock. You, Loretta, you are a savings bond. Safe, perhaps, but low yield. We have decided that the family resources are best concentrated where they will generate the most prestige." They laid it out for me like a business acquisition. They would not pay for my college. They would not co-sign a loan. If I wanted to go, I was on my own. "It's for your own good," Bernice had added, sipping her wine. "It will teach you the value of a dollar. Besides, some people are destined to support the structure, not lead it. You'll make a wonderful administrative assistant someday." I remember looking at Sylvia. She was 14 then, sitting at the end of the table, smirking. She didn't understand the cruelty of it yet. She only understood that she had won. She was the chosen one. So I left. I declined NYU because I couldn't afford the debt. I went to a state university. I worked double shifts at a diner. I took night classes. I lived in an apartment with 3 other girls and black mold in the bathroom. I missed Christmas holidays because the overtime pay was too good to pass up. For 12 years, I became the family's cautionary tale. At parties, my parents would whisper about my struggles to their friends, shaking their heads with performative sadness, positioning themselves as the long-suffering parents of a wayward child. They never mentioned they had cut me off. They let people assume I was just incompetent. Meanwhile, Sylvia soared. Tutors, semesters in Florence, internships at Vogue, arranged by Aunt Phyllis a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday. She was groomed to be the face of Vandergraft Holdings. But there was one person at that dinner table who hadn't spoken that night. One person who had watched the transaction with eyes like flint. My grandmother, Estelle Vandergraft. The woman who had actually built the company from the ground up after her husband died in the 60s. She had sat silently at the head of the table, her arthritic hands folded over her cane. I thought she was asleep or indifferent. I was wrong. She was taking notes. Grandma Estelle was a terrifying woman to most people. She stood barely 5 feet tall, shrinking with age, but she carried herself with the density of a collapsed star. She didn't suffer fools, and she certainly didn't suffer my father despite him being her only son. While my parents ignored me, Estelle summoned me. Every Sunday afternoon, while Sylvia was at tennis camp or violin lessons, I was required to report to Estelle's penthouse on the Upper East Side. Initially, I thought these visits were a punishment. The apartment was filled with heavy velvet drapes and smelled of lavender and old paper. "Sit," she would command, pointing to the wingback chair opposite her desk. "Stop slouching. You look like a question mark. Be an exclamation point." She didn't bake cookies. She didn't ask about boys. She taught me how to read a balance sheet. She explained the difference between liquidity and solvency. She told me stories about the strikes of 1974, about how she outmaneuvered the male-dominated board to keep control of the company. "Your father," she told me once, pouring tea from a silver pot, "is a manager. He maintains things. He likes shiny objects. But he is not a builder. A builder understands the foundation." Do you know what the foundation is, Loretta? "Money," I guessed. No, she snapped. Hunger. The foundation is hunger. You have to be hungry enough to eat the things that taste bitter. I didn't understand her then. I was tired from working nights at the diner and studying for my finals. I was resentful that I had to be there while Sylvia was likely shopping on Fifth Avenue. Why didn't you stop them? I asked her one rainy afternoon in my junior year. Why didn't you make them pay for my school? Estelle looked at me, her eyes sharp behind her bifocals. Because, my dear, if I handed you everything, you would become them, and I cannot afford for you to be them. It felt like a betrayal. I stopped visiting for a month. When I finally returned, she was frailer. The cancer was eating her away, though she forbade anyone from discussing it. On the last Sunday I saw her alive, she handed me a small, heavy iron key. "There is a safety deposit box at the First National," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Do not open it until the day your father makes his grand announcement. You will know when that is. He loves grand announcements." "Grandma, please," I said, holding her hand. It felt like dry parchment. "Just tell me what's going on." "I have been watching Loretta," she said, squeezing my fingers with surprising strength. "I have watched you work while they play. I have watched you suffer while they feast. Character is not formed in comfort. It is formed in the fire. You are iron now. They are just glass." She died 3 weeks later. At the reading of her will, my father inherited the voting shares, the properties, and the title of CEO. Sylvia received a trust fund to ensure her comfort. I received her collection of vintage scarves. My parents laughed about it in the car ride home. "Senile old bat," Harrison had chuckled. At least she didn't leave the company to the cat. I kept the scarves, and I kept the key. The 4 years between Estelle's death and Sylvia's graduation were the hardest of my life. I had graduated and moved to the city, sharing a shoebox apartment in Queens. I worked as a junior analyst for a logistics firm, a job I got on my own merits without the Vandergraft name. In fact, I used my middle name on my resume, Loretta V. Lewis. I didn't want anyone to know I was related to the real estate tycoons. I learned the value of a dollar just as Bernice had predicted, but not in the way she intended. I learned that a dollar was survival. I learned how to negotiate with landlords, how to stretch a pantry for 2 weeks, how to fix a leaking sink because I couldn't afford a plumber. Meanwhile, social media was a constant window into the life I was denied. I saw photos of Sylvia in Mykonos, Sylvia at the Met Gala, Sylvia driving a convertible Porsche that cost more than my cumulative salary. My parents stopped inviting me to family vacations. "It would just be awkward, dear," Bernice told me over the phone. "You couldn't afford the activities, and we wouldn't want you to feel out of place." So I stayed in the city. I worked, I saved, and I remembered Estelle's lessons. I read the financial news every morning. I tracked Vandergraft holdings. I noticed things my father probably missed. I saw that they were over-leveraged in commercial real estate just as the market was softening. I saw that they were spending lavishly on brand image while cutting costs on maintenance. I was forging myself layer by layer. I was becoming hard, sharp, and durable. Then came the invitation to the graduation party. It wasn't really an invitation, it was a summons. "Sylvia is graduating," the heavy cardstock read. "Join us as we welcome the new era of Vandergraft." I debated not going, but the key in my drawer seemed to burn a hole through the wood. The day of the grand announcement. This was it. I took the day off work. I put on my best consignment dress. I took the train to Greenwich, and as I walked up the driveway of my childhood home, passing the cars I would never drive, and the people who would never respect me, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, cold calm. I was the iron. They were the glass. Back at the party, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. The speeches were ramping up. Harrison was still at the microphone, his face flushed with champagne and pride. "Sylvia has shown the kind of tenacity that defines a Vandergraft," he declared. "She finished top of her class." I knew for a fact she was in the middle of the pack, but facts were flexible for Harrison. and she is ready to take her rightful place as Executive Vice President of Development. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Sylvia blushed prettily, waving to her admirers. Furthermore, Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphone amplified to a boom. I am announcing today that I am beginning the process of transferring the controlling interest of the family trust to Sylvia, effective upon my retirement in 5 years. This company will remain in the hands of those who were born to lead it. That was the signal, the grand announcement. I reached into my bag and touched the envelope the courier had given me. But before I could stand, a commotion at the front gate drew everyone's attention. A security guard was trying to block a man from entering. The man was elderly, wearing a suit that was at least 20 years out of style, brown tweed in a sea of linen. He carried a battered leather briefcase. I have business with the board, the man shouted, his voice surprisingly strong. Who is that? Bernice hissed, shielding her eyes. I recognized him instantly. It was Arthur Penhaligon. He had been Grandma Estelle's personal attorney for 40 years. He was the one man my father hated more than anyone else because Arthur was incorruptible. He had retired the day Estelle died, vanishing into the countryside. Let him through. I stood up. I hadn't meant to shout, but my voice carried over the hushed crowd. Harrison glared at me from the stage. Loretta, sit down. Security, remove that man. I wouldn't do that, Harrison, Arthur called out, shaking off the guard's hand. He walked onto the lawn, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. He didn't look at the guests. He looked straight at my father. Unless you want to explain to the Securities and Exchange Commission why you barred the executor of the 1970 Founders Trust from a shareholder meeting. This isn't a shareholder meeting, Harrison spat. It's a graduation party. Oh, it's both, Arthur said, reaching the stage. He climbed the stairs slowly, laboriously. When he reached the microphone, he didn't ask for permission. He simply took it from my father's hand. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, he addressed the crowd, and I am here to read the final codicil of Estelle Vandergraft's last will and testament. A codicil that was triggered the moment Harrison Vandergraft publicly announced a successor. The silence on the lawn was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Harrison tried to grab the microphone back, but Arthur, despite his age, was quick. He pivoted, pulling a sheaf of documents from his briefcase. You can't do this, Arthur, Harrison hissed, his face turning a mottled purple. The will was settled 6 years ago. The public will was settled, Arthur corrected, his voice amplified for all 300 guests to hear. But you know your mother better than that, Harrison. Estelle always had a contingency plan. She called it the character clause. Bernice had rushed to the stage, now clutching her pearls. This is insane. He's senile. Someone call the police. I am the legal representative of the Vandergraft estate, Arthur boomed. Sit down, Bernice. To everyone's shock, Bernice sat. Arthur adjusted his spectacles and looked out at the crowd. He finally found me in the back at table 19. He nodded once. Estelle Vandergraft founded this company in 1962. Arthur began reading. She believed that wealth without labor was a poison. She feared that her descendants would become soft, entitled, and incapable of true leadership. Therefore, in 1970, she created a blind trust containing the Class A voting shares, essentially the controlling interest of the entire Vandergraft empire. He paused for effect. The trust has a specific trigger condition regarding the education of her grandchildren. Estelle knew that Harrison and Bernice would likely favor one child over the other. She predicted they would shower one with resources and neglect the other. She told me, Harrison is a snob. He will bet on the show pony and starve the workhorse. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Sylvia's smile falter. She looked from her father to her mother, confusion clouding her perfect face. The terms of the trust are simple, Arthur continued. The Class A shares are to be bequeathed to the grandchild who completes their university education without the financial assistance of the Vandergraft family accounts. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. If a grandchild accepts tuition room board or monthly stipends from the parents, Arthur read, they are disqualified from inheriting the controlling interest. They are deemed dependents. However, if a grandchild funds their own education through work scholarships and independent loans, they are deemed the successor. Harrison froze. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. He turned slowly to look at Sylvia. Sylvia, whose degree cost $250,000. Sylvia, whose apartment was paid for by the company. Sylvia, whose entire existence was a line item on my father's expense report. Then slowly, every head in the garden turned toward table 19, toward the back, toward the service entrance, toward me. That's impossible, Bernice shrieked, breaking the spell. Loretta is a secretary. She went to a state school. She has debt. Precisely, Arthur said, a thin smile touching his lips. He waved a hand toward me. Loretta Vandergraft has $42,000 in outstanding student loans. She worked at Sal's Diner for 4 years. She was employed as a junior analyst at Logistics Corp. I have the tax returns. I have the loan documents. I have the bank statements showing 0 transfers from any Vandergraft account. Arthur looked at my parents with a mixture of pity and contempt. By cutting her off, by refusing to sign her loans, by forcing her to struggle, you did exactly what Estelle wanted. You forged her. You ensured that she is the only one in this family who understands the value of $1. No, Harrison whispered. I own this company. I am the CEO. You are the caretaker, Arthur corrected. You hold the Class B shares. They pay dividends, but they don't vote on board matters. As of this moment, per the 1970 trust, the 51% controlling stake belongs to Loretta. Sylvia dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the stage, the sound sharp and violent. Daddy, what does that mean? What does he mean? Harrison ignored her. He was staring at me. For the first time in my life, he wasn't looking through me. He was looking at me, and he was terrified. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I remembered Grandma Estelle's voice. Be an exclamation point. I walked from the back of the garden. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. These people, the bankers, the politicians, the socialites who had ignored me for an hour, were now stepping back with reverence. They smelled power shift in the air, and they were quick to align with it. I walked past the hydrangeas. I walked past the orchestra. I climbed the stairs to the stage. I stood next to Arthur. I looked at my sister, who was trembling in her Chanel suit. I looked at my mother, who was pale as a sheet. I looked at my father. You said I was a low-yield investment, I said to him quietly. Harrison swallowed hard. Loretta, sweetheart, let's not make a scene. We can discuss this inside. We are discussing it now, I said. This is a graduation party, isn't it? Let's celebrate my graduation. It was 6 years ago, but I think I'm finally ready to accept my diploma. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my parents' egos. The house, I said, turning to Arthur. Who owns the deed to this estate? Arthur checked his ledger. Technically, the estate is owned by Vandergraft Holdings. Harrison and Bernice have a lifetime lease, pending board approval. And the board, so? I asked. You are the board, Arthur said. Bernice let out a sob. You wouldn't. Loretta, this is your home. No, Mother, I said. My home is a 4th-floor walk-up in Queens with a radiator that clanks all night. This is a corporate asset. Sylvia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. What about me? Daddy promised me the VP position. He promised me the Tribeca loft. The loft is company property, Arthur noted. And the VP position, Well, nepotism policies are usually up to the majority shareholder. Sylvia looked at me, her eyes pleading. Loretta, please. I didn't know. I did what they told me. I studied art history because Mom said it was elegant. I don't know how to do anything else. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. Sylvia wasn't the villain. She was a product. A spoiled, shiny, useless product manufactured by my parents. She had never been given the chance to struggle, so she had never developed any muscles. She was soft. I'm not going to throw you on the street, Sylvia, I said. I'm not cruel, unlike our parents. I turned to the crowd. Thank you all for coming. The party is over. Please finish your drinks and vacate the premises. The family has business to attend to. It was a beautiful thing to watch 300 social climbers evacuate a lawn in under 10 minutes. The band packed up. The caterers began breaking down tables. Harrison slumped into a chair on the stage. He looked 10 years older than he had 20 minutes ago. I built this brand, he muttered. I kept it alive. You spent it, I corrected. I've seen the financials, Dad. The leveraged buyouts, the loans against the equity to fund your lifestyle. You've been bleeding the company dry to pretend you're a tycoon. Grandma Estelle left you a fortress and you turned it into a bouncy castle. I did what I had to do, he shouted, to maintain our standing. Well, I said, taking the key. Arthur handed me the key to the company vault. The maintenance period is over. The renovation begins now. We moved the meeting to the library inside the house. The air conditioning was humming, but my parents were sweating. I sat behind my father's massive oak desk. It felt natural. Arthur sat to my right. Harrison, Bernice, and Sylvia sat on the leather sofa looking like errant schoolchildren. Here is how this is going to work, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. First, Harrison, you will announce your retirement effective immediately. We will cite health reasons. It will save you the embarrassment of being fired by your daughter. Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. If you fight me, I will release the audit of your personal spending from the company accounts. The vacations, the cars, the jewelry. The IRS might find it interesting. He closed his mouth. He knew I had him. Second, Bernice. You will resign from the boards of the 3 charities you sit on as the Vandergraft representative. We can no longer afford the donations you pledged to buy your social status. Bernice wept into her handkerchief. But the autumn gala. I'm the chairwoman. Not anymore, I said. And Sylvia? I turned to my sister. She flinched. You can keep the loft for 3 months, I said. After that, you'll need to pay rent at market rate. As for a job, I am willing to hire you. Her face lit up with hope. Really, Vice President? No, I said. We have an opening in the archives department. Scanning documents, filing data entry. It pays $45,000 a year. It comes with health insurance. That's insulting, Bernice cried. She's a Yale graduate. She has no experience, I said. I started at a diner. She can start in the archives. If she works hard, if she shows up on time, if she learns the business from the bottom up, maybe in a few years we can talk about a promotion. I looked at Sylvia. It's the best offer you're going to get. No one else is going to hire an art history major with 0 skills and a high salary expectation. Sylvia looked at her hands. She looked at her parents, who were broken shells. Then she looked at me. I'll take it, she whispered. Sylvia. Bernice gasped. I'll take it, Sylvia said louder. Loretta is right. I don't know anything. I want to learn. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt all day. Good. Report to HR on Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late. I stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, Arthur and I have a company to save. You can show yourselves out of my office. 6 months later, the view from the corner office of the Vandergraft building in Manhattan was breathtaking. From the 40th floor, the cars looked like toys, the people like ants. I sat in the chair that used to belong to my grandmother. I had replaced the heavy mahogany desk with something modern, glass and steel. The office no longer smelled of cigars and stagnation. It smelled of espresso and industry. It hadn't been easy. The stock took a hit when Harrison retired, but it rebounded when I announced our new strategic direction, pivoting away from luxury commercial real estate into affordable housing and sustainable development. The market liked the story, the prodigal granddaughter returning to clean up the mess. I was tired. I worked 14-hour days. I missed the simplicity of my old life, sometimes the anonymity of it. But I was building something real. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sylvia. Archived the 1985 contracts. Found a discrepancy in the property tax filings. Should I bring it up to legal? I smiled. She was actually good at this. She was meticulous. She had stopped wearing Chanel to work and started wearing cardigans from the Gap. She brought her lunch. We grabbed coffee on Fridays. We weren't best friends, there was too much water under the bridge, but we were sisters again. Or maybe for the first time. Harrison and Bernice had moved to a smaller condo in Florida. We spoke on holidays. They were polite, distant, and treated me with a terrified respect. They were still glass. But I didn't need them to be iron anymore. I swiveled my chair to look at the portrait of Grandma Estelle hanging on the wall. She looked stern, unsmiling. But I knew the truth now. She hadn't just left me a company. She had given me a life. She had protected me from the curse of easy money. She had allowed me to become someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, with or without the Vandergraft name. I picked up the old iron key from my desk, the one that had opened the safety deposit box containing the trust documents. I kept it as a paperweight. A reminder. My name is Loretta Vandergraft. I was the one they didn't pay for. I was the bad investment. And because of that, I became the only asset that mattered. To anyone out there feeling overlooked, underestimated, or left behind by the people who should have supported you, remember this. The fire that burns you is also the fire that hardens you. Let them have their easy paths. You are building something they can never buy. You are building yourself.